Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today I'm looking at a video from the always over-the-top Tomorrow's World viewpoint, home of the grumpy old men angrily pontificating into the camera. Today's grumpy old man is going to talk to us about the probability of evolution, which I'm sure isn't going to rely on any oversimplified math or any assertions or anything like that, right? So let's go!
The origin of life.
Okay, gonna stop you right there, and I think you just won the record for the earliest I've ever had to cut someone off. But the title of this video is, "This is why evolution is wrong." Evolution does not deal with the origin of life, it just deals with the diversification of already existing life. If you somehow prove that the origin of life required a supernatural intervention, you have not done anything to disprove evolution. It still happens. Now, you were saying?
The origin of life is a much debated topic.
Yes, as it should be. We don't figure out how things work by just presenting one solution, having everyone agree that that must be the solution, and then ignoring any evidence that it isn't the correct solution. Anywhere where there is a scientific unknown, there will be scientific debate.
Some have dedicated their lives to finding an answer.
Yeah, it really is amazing how specific scientists can get with their careers nowadays.
Others write the question off as unanswerable.
Yeah, I suppose there are some who do that. Personally, I fall into the camp that is convinced that we will figure out potentially more than one plausible path from simple organic compounds to the first of what we would call life, but we will never be able to know for certain which one is the one that actually happened in the Earth's past, or if it was some other path that we haven't even considered yet.
Just what is the probability of life occurring spontaneously from non-life with the ability to reproduce?
A potentially interesting question for statisticians if they are interested in the subject, but an ultimately meaningless question as life is here now, so whatever the probability was, it was enough that it happened. This is an example of the lottery fallacy, where you look at an event that has already happened, determine that its odds of happening are low, and thereby conclude that there had to be some outside influence making that event more likely to happen. What are the odds that Joe won the lottery? If he bought one ticket, it's usually about 1 in 290 million. So it is extremely unlikely that Joe won the lottery. Yet he did. But that doesn't mean that the lottery was rigged. What were the odds that someone would win the lottery? 100%. And for each ticket, it was a 1 in 290 million chance. But one of the tickets had to win. I'm not saying that life had to happen, but what I am saying is that to look back at a past event that has occurred, declare it to be highly improbable, and therefore conclude that it is impossible to have occurred without supernatural intervention, is invalid. In fact, a very low probability event is still probable, otherwise we wouldn't be able to express it in terms of probability, and very low probability events happen literally all the time.
We should remember that just because something exists does not mean the probability of the event is 100%.
I actually agree, sort of. When looking at a past event, the fact that one outcome has occurred does not affect what the probability of that outcome was before it happened. I mean, I'm sure this point could be argued, and I have seen many people say something along these lines in the past. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you could find a video of me saying that in the past. But ultimately, it doesn't matter. Low probability is made up for by high frequency. The universe is a big place with lots of Earth-like planets in their stars' habitable zones. Given how many environments exist in the universe that would be conducive to the development of life, it is completely unsurprising that life developed at least once.
As the event may have been the result of a willful intervention.
But wouldn't having someone influencing the outcome make the chances go up, not down? You can't go higher than 100%.
It has become abundantly clear that the Earth is the only place where life exists in our solar system.
No, that is not abundantly clear. Sure, it's definitely the only place where life is known to exist, and it is extremely unlikely that there are alien civilizations that we don't know about within our own solar system, but there could definitely be some form of simple life going on in, say, the oceans of Europa, Callisto, or Enceladus, and actually any number of icy moons that potentially have liquid subsurface oceans. Hell, remember back in September when phosphine was found in the atmosphere of Venus? That is a story that is an excellent example of the dichotomy between the actual scientific work going on and the news coverage. I don't know about you, but I hadn't heard any follow-up on the initial report until I went looking for it just now. Turns out, even though this would have been an amazing scientific discovery, scientists don't just find data that they like and run with it. Everything, even the most exciting discoveries, gets challenged, and the phosphine on Venus is no exception. The initial report had a processing error in their dataset. When reanalyzed, they still found phosphine, but significantly less than before. It's still exciting, and could still be a potential sign of biologic activity, but it is looking less likely that that is the case as more research is done on the matter, and I'll bet that most people haven't heard any of this follow-up. Now, sure, this doesn't help my case that there might be extraterrestrial life out in our solar system, but since creationists are so fond of presenting scientists as though they are people who are willing to join in on a massive cover-up conspiracy at the drop of a hat if the conspiracy goes along with their anti-God agenda, I thought I'd just take the time to point out that in something that without a doubt would have been favorable for the case of abiogenesis was immediately and somewhat successfully challenged by other scientists working in that area.
All of the other planetary bodies have been explored to one extent or another.
Yeah, I guess, to one extent or another, whatever that means. But you're ignoring the fact that a lot of these planetary bodies have things like, moons? Some of them have dozens of moons, and several of these moons are known to contain vast subsurface oceans, and we have not been able to explore all of the moons to know how many do and how many don't. The moons of Uranus, for instance, have not been seen up close since Voyager 2's flyby in 1986. Several of them are composed of at least 50% ice, and given the right conditions, it is entirely possible that they also have subsurface oceans. In fact, subsurface oceans would account for some of the surface features that they have quite nicely. Liquid water is generally agreed to be one of the most important factors in the initial formation of life, and the fact of the matter is that there are potentially dozens of moons in our solar system alone which have environments that may be conducive to the formation of life, and we haven't landed a probe on a single one of them yet. Now, sure, it wouldn't be surprising to me if it turned out that we are actually alone in our solar system, but our solar system is one of 5 times 10 to the 16th similar solar systems in the observable universe using extremely conservative estimates. Like, I estimated 0.00001% of all the stars in the universe are sun-like stars for that calculation. The actual estimated figure is 7%, so just add a few more zeros to my number to come up with a number that is likely closer to the actual number.
Without revealing the existence of any organic tissue.
Why are you just focusing specifically on tissue? Organic compounds are found all the time. In fact, Uranus and Neptune are blue because of how much methane is in their atmosphere. Methane is an organic compound, and I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere about Uranus blue methane or something like that. We've also found amino acids on meteorites. These are fairly complex organic compounds. Sure, we haven't found any tissues outside of Earth, but we found plenty of the building blocks of life, and we haven't looked closely enough to actually rule out life. Though certainly I'm not keeping my hopes up. I agree that it's unlikely, but to state that it is conclusively demonstrated that life isn't there is just a baseless assertion.
Well, how many planets might be out there in the Milky Way and the galaxies beyond?
Well, according to my extremely conservative calculations, there are at least 4 times 10 to the 15th Earth-like planets around Sun-like stars in the observable universe, and that's not even touching on the other potential planetary configurations that could be conducive to life, or that this is only considering life as we know it.
Can we expect that somewhere else life has spontaneously developed and is flourishing?
I think so, yes. Are we likely to find it? No. The universe is pretty fucking big.
What is the probability of finding life outside of the Earth?
Of actually finding it? I would say pretty much 0. Of it actually existing? I wouldn't even know how to begin calculating that. First, you'd have to know how life formed on Earth in the first place, and we haven't cracked that nut yet, but then you'd need to take into account all the potential variations that might also have worked to form life, and then there's always the possibility that life could form in a way that we aren't even capable of imagining. So I would say non-zero for sure, but I have no idea how much larger than 0 it would be. There is no evidence that the Earth is somehow special in the universe, so I'd say it's probably a fair bit above 0, but again, we don't have enough information to actually make that conclusion.
Traditionally, people under the influence of religion have viewed life on Earth as the product of a deliberate and planned creation.
I like how you phrased that. If I had said that, it would have come across as derogatory. But sure, people under the influence of religion came up with mythical stories to explain the unexplainable. Happens all the time in human history.
Others explain the presence of life through a slow process of development or evolution.
Oh, look, it's the false dichotomy between people who have religion and people who accept evolution. Yay! I never tire of that one.
Which presently seems to be the most accepted point of view.
Yes, there's a reason for that. In fact, if there were good scientific reason to believe in young Earth creationism, then you'd be able to find at least a few secular scientists who agree with the position. But alas, it is the religiously motivated 100% of the time. Meanwhile, religious scientists like Francis Collins are out there doing real work that is improving our knowledge of how the world works while accepting scientific conclusions, including evolution. In fact, a lot of Francis Collins' work would be impossible if evolution were not true, so there's that.
Well, how do mathematicians assess the probability of the origin of life?
Yeah, because when figuring out whether or not something is possible in biology, it's always best to ask a non-biologist.
Probability is a field of mathematics that assesses the likelihood of an event occurring. Given enough information, all of the possible outcomes or arrangements of a situation can be determined. Mathematicians can therefore predict with considerable accuracy the possibility of an event occurring.
Just remember the caveat that you gave. Given enough information. Since we don't actually know how life began at this time, it is impossible to calculate the probability of life beginning with any amount of certainty.
In mathematics, if the chances of something occurring are less than 1 over 10 to the power of 50, we generally say the chances of that event are nil. That is, it will not occur.
Well, then I guess no events ever occur. Because if you look at the probability of all the events leading up to the events that are occurring now, the probabilities get astronomically more tiny than that. Just as an example, if we assume that every man only ejaculates once in his entire lifetime, and every woman only has one egg that is guaranteed to get hit by a sperm, then the chances of any particular sperm hitting that one egg during intercourse would be about 1 in 280 million. Let's round down to make this simpler. So the chance of any particular combination of genetic material in this instance is 1 in 200 million. But the genetics are determined by the parent's genetics, so the odds that the man who would ejaculate to make this new person have to be taken into account here too. Think of it like rolling a 200 million-sided die. To get a result that is based on the last roll, you need to roll another 200 million-sided die. So we have to multiply these results together. So the likelihood of that particular genetic combination over 2 generations is 1 in 4 times 10 to the 16th. After just 7 generations, we get to 1 chance in 1.28 times 10 to the 58th. So that's a few orders of magnitude less than impossible according to your information here. And this is a drastically oversimplified scenario that ignores the fact that women don't just have one egg that just comes out when the one ejaculation of the man is ready. Each woman has thousands of potential eggs, and each man has millions of potential sperm in each ejaculation, most of which will never see the light of day. Well, actually, more will see the light of day than will see an egg, so maybe that was a bad way to put it. But you get the idea. It is impossible for people to exist, because the particular combination of genetic material that results in all the people that exist today had a much smaller probability of occurring when you look at all the available potential combinations of genetic material going back just a few generations. And that's not even accounting for how unlikely it is for two people to meet each other on this planet in the first place. Small probability events happen all the time because of the large frequency of events.
This is because 10 to the power of 50 represents a number that is far greater than the estimated number of planets in the entire universe.
No, It is an entirely arbitrary cutoff. It has nothing to do with how many planets are in the universe. If it was based on the number of planets, it would actually be more like 1 in 10 to the 25th, as that is how many planets are estimated to exist in the observable universe. But then, this is just limiting it to how many there are orbiting stars, so if we throw rogue planets into the mix, it could be up to 1 in 10 to the 32nd. So either way, you're a few orders of magnitude off.
The development of life from simple non-living matter represents the coming together of various molecules to form more organized and complex structures, which includes very intricate and essential molecular machines.
I mean, now it does, but as has been shown in lab conditions, lifelike behavior of decidedly non-life molecules can happen with just a few simple compounds.
Thus, the spontaneous development of life requires things moving from less order to more order. Evolutionary thought is predicated on the premise that matter can move to a higher state of order in an unguided or accidental way.
Well, it can. This is something that we see all the time. When magma cools to form rock crystals, the matter goes from a disordered state to a more ordered state. When snowflakes form, the water molecules go from a disordered state to an ordered state. Now, no, this is not perfectly random. It's not that the ice crystals could form in a different arrangement but need some external force to make them form the orderly crystals that we enjoy, but rather the laws of physics won't allow them to form in any other way, which then begs the question, why are we even talking about probability here?
Not only once, but with literally millions of steps along the way.
Yeah, millions of steps with small changes and improvements between steps and much death and unsuccessful experimentation. This is much more plausible than one giant leap.
Mathematics holds an opposite view. To evaluate the likelihood of this possibility, mathematicians would first consider the second thermodynamic law, called the law of entropy.
And why would they do that? The second law of thermodynamics doesn't apply here. The second law of thermodynamics is that the entropy of an isolated system will increase over time. An isolated system is a system that does not exchange matter or energy with its surroundings at all. Since the Earth does both regularly, both receiving energy from the sun and radiating off its own energy, and receiving particles from space and shedding its own particles from the upper atmosphere, it does not even come close to qualifying as an isolated system. If we're talking about biological systems, it's even worse. Biological systems require nutrient and energy sources that are external to them. In other words, when you thermodynamically isolate a biological system, it will eventually cease its biological functioning. It'd be dead.
As Dr. W.H. Thorpe puts it, the likelihood of life occurring by chance is fantastically improbable.
And since fantastically improbable events happen literally all the time, that's not a problem.
The spontaneous formation of life violates the second thermodynamic law, which states that all closed physical systems tend toward a state of maximum disorder.
And this is where I come to doubt the accuracy of this quote. W.H. Thorpe was a well-respected entomologist and a Fellow of the Royal Society of London. There are only 3 places that I can even find this quote online. One is the Living Church of God Canada website on their page where they are promoting this exact video. One is an off-the-cuff remark in an online newsletter where the author used the first sentence of this quote as a springboard to then go on and say that the likelihood of the first week of college going smoothly is fantastically improbable. And the other is a blog by some guy named Elliot, and in reading through his post, it's just a word-for-word transcription of this video that he's passing off as his own work. And actually, it's funny, he lists Tomorrow's World Viewpoint as his primary source, but when you just copy something word for word, it's not a source, it's plagiarism. And none of these sites say where the quote can be found originally, so I can't check it for context. So for all I know, this quote was removed from context in the similar way as Darwin's quote about the eye is often removed from its context. This could be Dr. Thorpe explaining why he can understand that people think evolution or abiogenesis is impossible, right before explaining why it actually is possible. It could also have just been made up out of whole cloth. Future Rhino cutting in for a sec. Special thanks to patron Aaron Baldwin, who tracked down the quote for me. Turns out I couldn't find it because I was searching for it as they presented it, and as I guessed, it is not an accurate quote. The actual quote is, "Therefore, at any instant, not more than 1 in 10 to the 603rd possible proteins could exist at all, so the simultaneous formation of 2 or more molecules of a given enzyme purely by chance is fantastically improbable. Since we yet really know so little about the age, dimensions, or complexity of the universe, we can really make no useful calculations about the probability of the occurrence of life's origin." So, as I guessed, it was taken out of context and modified. Originally, it was just pointing out that we don't have enough information to even perform the calculation, something that I've already mentioned here. Also, remember, patrons get access to my videos a day early. Back to you, Past Rhino.
According to Dr. Jean Morton, the probability for arranging amino acids for 10 enzymes would be 1 over 10 to the power of 113.
Yes, Dr. Jean Morton, in this paper published by the obviously entirely unbiased and objective organization Institute for Creation Research, calculated the probability of a protein with a length of 100 amino acids forming spontaneously as being 1 chance in 10 to the 113th. But the problem is that Dr. Morton assumed that all combinations of amino acids are equally likely. Now, in Dr. Morton's defense, this paper was published in 1980 when the protein first hypothesis for abiogenesis was more popular than it is today, but we know now that RNA is capable of catalyzing reactions like a protein, and can also self-replicate, so RNA looks pretty snazzy as an origin of life molecule. But, of course, research is still going into it, and the protein first idea isn't dead yet. Hell, there's even a metabolism first model, which would have metabolic processes developing before proteins or RNA. And, of course, this whole argument relies on an acceptance of the idea that something is impossible if the chances are less than 1 in 10 to the 50th, which just isn't true. Roll a die 100 times. Whatever combination of numbers you ended up with, the chances were less than 1 in 10 to the 50th. But it happened. The chances that your specific genetic combination exists as a result of the couplings of all of your ancestors are way less than this 1 in 10 to the 113th number, and yet you still exist.
It is estimated that the human body contains 25,000 enzymes. If each of these were only a small enzyme consisting of 100 amino acids with a probability of 1 over 10 to the power of 113, the probability of getting all 25,000 would be 1 over 10 to the power of 2,825,000.
I'm struggling to figure out why you even think that is relevant. Do you think that the abiogenesis researchers think that a fully developed human was the first life to form? Do you think that there weren't any factors that could influence the likelihood of one enzyme forming over, say, another one? If I toss a handful of magnets, there are certain configurations that they could land in that are much more likely than others, because physics. In the case of enzymes, proteins, and whatnot, because chemistry, which is because physics by extension, I suppose.
To put it another way, former astrophysicist and head of mathematics at Wales University, Dr. Wickramasinghe, and English astronomer Sir Fred Hoyle, who formulated the theory of stellar nucleosynthesis, described the likelihood of human evolution to be as mathematically plausible as, and I quote, "a tornado blowing through a junkyard and leaving behind a complete and flyable Boeing 747.
God damn it, I didn't expect that. That analogy is complete and utter garbage because it ignores all of the mechanisms of natural selection, even those which creationists often have to agree with in order to make Noah's Ark, well, I don't want to say make sense because it still doesn't, but their attempt at making it make sense.
In the case of the 747, the organizing force which assembles it is a labor force of men and women. In the case of the cell, evolutionary scientists are turning over every rock in search of events or natural phenomena to explain evolution's triumph over probability and the known laws of nature.
Well, the probability as you described it isn't an issue, and you have yet to provide an example of a law of nature that is violated by evolution or abiogenesis, so no, you're wrong.
These men I have quoted are some of the most respected mathematicians on the planet.
Well, Fred Hoyle certainly did accomplish a lot in his life, but unfortunately for him, he's mostly remembered for his derogatory remarks about Big Bang cosmology that actually resulted in it being called the Big Bang. And that tornado in a junkyard argument is also known as Hoyle's fallacy. It's really just proof that incredibly intelligent people can still make really bad arguments.
They are not religious nutcases.
No, they weren't. However, they were also known for their contrarian views on a number of scientific subjects. I mean, they worked together to propose that the 1918 flu pandemic was caused by pathogens being carried by cometary dust. And while Hoyle is no longer with us, Dr. Wikram Singh is still at it, having proposed that the SARS-CoV-2 virus came to Earth on a meteorite that was seen over northern China in October of 2019. That's it for this one. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Stephen Bauman. I'm stealing it from Twitter this time because I really like this and I wanted to briefly mention it. People who dumb down words used in English to define them strictly as their translated roots, especially when we have much better definitions, would have a real hard time trying to argue what a hypothesis is by that method. Exactly. I don't know if Stephen was thinking of the definition fight about the word atheist when he wrote this, but yeah, if you'll recall from my video from Monday, he started his argument off with, the prefix a means not, and theos means God, so atheos is not God. Well, hypothesis comes from the Greek hupo for under and thesis for placing, so hypothesis literally means placing under. I don't think that's what most scientists mean when they lay out their hypotheses. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, Lynn Dobbs, Mark McManus, What Jesus, and all the rest, who are the sperm that fertilize the egg that is my channel. If you'd like to pay me to have me compare you to cum, you can join us on Patreon for as little as $1 per week over at patreon.com/ViceRhino. If you feel so inclined, you can support the channel through direct donation or my Amazon wishlist, which are linked in the description. If you'd like to listen to my videos in podcast form, the link for that is also in the description, as well as links to my social media accounts and my P.O. Box address. See you next time!